The courtroom was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The air felt heavy, filled with tension and whispers that quickly faded whenever the judge looked up. It was one of those cases that had attracted a lot of attention, not because it was big or political, but because something unusual was happening. A young boy, no older than 17, stood near the defense table. His clothes were simple, nothing fancy, just a plain shirt and trousers. He looked calm, but there was a sharp focus in his eyes that most people in the room failed to notice. The judge, an older man known for his arrogance, leaned back in his chair, watching the boy with disbelief. "Are you lost, kid?" the judge asked, his tone full of sarcasm. The courtroom chuckled. Even the opposing attorney smiled slightly, thinking this must be some sort of joke. The boy didn't move. He just looked at the judge and said quietly, "I'm here for the defense." Laughter filled the room. The judge smirked and shook his head. "You're joking, right? This is a court of law, not a school play," but the boy didn't smile. "I'm serious, Your Honor." The judge sighed, annoyed. "Where is the real attorney?" The boy calmly pointed toward the empty chair beside him. "He's not here today. I'll be representing the client," the courtroom murmured again. The judge leaned forward, studying the boy's face. There was no fear, no nervousness, just quiet determination. The judge thought he was being tricked. Maybe this was a prank, maybe the media was trying to make a fool of him. He glanced at the bailiff, then back at the boy. "You think you can just walk in here and play lawyer? This is not a place for games," the judge said sharply. "I'm not playing," the boy replied softly. The judge laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "Fine," he said, his voice full of mockery. "Let's see what you can do." The boy opened a thin folder he had brought with him. Inside were several sheets of paper filled with neat handwriting and detailed notes. He placed them gently on the table, then turned to the witness stand. The case was about a small business owner accused of fraud. The evidence seemed strong against him. Documents, bank statements, even a few witnesses who claimed he had cheated them. Everyone thought it was an open and shut case. The boy asked to cross-examine the first witness. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting a disaster. The witness, an older man in a suit, smiled as if this would be easy. But then the boy began to speak. Calm, clear, and confident. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the courtroom. He asked precise questions, each one designed to test the witness's memory. At first, the man answered smoothly, but after a few minutes he began to hesitate. The boy's questions were sharp, almost surgical. He pointed out small contradictions between what the man said and what was written in his earlier statements. The judge's amusement slowly faded. He leaned forward, listening more carefully now. The boy flipped through his papers and asked, "Sir, you said earlier that the meeting happened on June 14th, correct?" "Yes," the witness replied. "But this document here," the boy said, holding up a paper, "shows that you were out of town on that date. You even signed a hotel register in another city." The courtroom went silent. The witness blinked, caught off guard. I might have the date wrong," he stammered. "Or maybe," the boy continued quietly, "you're not telling the truth." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor quickly stood up, objecting, but the damage was done. The judge looked from the boy to the witness, then down at the paper. His expression shifted slightly. The mockery was gone, replaced by curiosity. The boy went on, pointing out other inconsistencies. He didn't raise his voice or act dramatic. He simply spoke with confidence, as though he had studied every detail of the case. The prosecutor tried to interrupt several times, but the boy responded politely each time, quoting the exact rules that allowed him to continue. The judge finally stopped the prosecutor. "Let him continue," he said. By the end of the cross-examination, the witness was sweating. The boy stepped back and said softly, "No further questions." The judge looked at him for a long moment before turning to the next witness. Throughout the day, the boy continued like this, calm, respectful, but relentless. Every time someone tried to dismiss him because of his age, he responded with knowledge and logic that left even experienced lawyers speechless. The judge, who had started the day mocking him, found himself paying close attention now. During the recess, people whispered about him in the hallway. Some thought he must be a law student from a top university. Others joked that he was probably just a relative of the accused, pretending to be a lawyer out of desperation. But no one could explain how he managed to know so much. When the court resumed, The boy presented evidence that had been ignored by everyone else. Small details in the financial reports, overlooked emails, and a timeline that revealed how someone else might have set up the business owner. He spoke slowly and clearly, making sure even the judge could follow his reasoning. The opposing lawyer tried to interrupt again, but the boy countered every argument with facts. It wasn't arrogance, it was precision. He never raised his tone or argued emotionally, he just explained. The judge began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: admiration. He had seen hundreds of cases and dozens of lawyers, but rarely had he seen someone so young think and speak with such clarity. By late afternoon, the courtroom atmosphere had completely changed. The laughter was gone. The judge no longer smirked. Everyone watched the boy with respect, even the security guard at the door. Finally, the judge called for a short break. When everyone stepped outside, the prosecutor approached the boy. "Listen, kid," he said quietly. "You're good, but this isn't a place for children. You should be careful about what you're doing." The boy smiled slightly. "I know what I'm doing," the prosecutor frowned. "Who taught you all this?" The boy looked at him calmly. "My father." "Your father's a lawyer." The boy paused, then said softly, "He was." The prosecutor looked puzzled. But before he could ask more, the judge returned, signaling everyone to take their seats. As the final part of the day began, the boy called his last witness, an accountant who had worked with the accused. The witness seemed nervous, avoiding eye contact. The boy questioned him gently at first, then slowly tightened the conversation until the man slipped up, admitting something that changed everything. He revealed that he had been pressured by someone to alter documents, and that someone was not the accused, but the very person who had filed the complaint. The courtroom gasped. The judge immediately leaned forward, asking the boy to repeat the statement for clarity. The boy did. The witness confirmed it again, this time in front of everyone. The judge stared at the boy, silent for a long moment. The expression on his face was no longer mocking. It was a mix of disbelief and respect. When court was adjourned for the day, the boy quietly packed his papers. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, asking who he was, where he came from, and how he managed to pull off something so extraordinary. But the boy said nothing. He simply walked out, his steps calm, his face unreadable. Inside the courtroom, the judge sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He replayed everything in his mind, the boy's calm tone, his precision, his composure. He couldn't understand it. No ordinary teenager could do that. Later that evening, as he reviewed the notes, the judge found something surprising. In one of the old case files, he saw a name, the same last name as the boy. Next to it was a photo of a respected attorney who had once argued in that very courtroom years ago. It was the boy's father. The judge realized then that the boy wasn't just talented. He had grown up surrounded by the law, learning from one of the best. And perhaps after his father's passing, he had come here to defend someone because no one else believed in them, just like his father once did. That night, the judge couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how he had mocked the boy in front of everyone. Tomorrow, he thought, he would find out the full story. But for now, all he could do was admit to himself something he hadn't said out loud in years. He had been wrong. And somewhere out there, that quiet young boy was preparing for the next day, knowing that the fight was far from over. The next morning, the courtroom looked different. The same people were there, the judge, the lawyers, the journalists. But the air had changed. Yesterday, they had laughed at the boy. Today, they were curious. Some even looked a little nervous. Everyone wanted to see what he would do next. The boy arrived quietly, just as he had before. He carried the same thin folder, walked the same slow steps, and greeted the court clerk politely. There was nothing flashy about him, but people couldn't take their eyes off him. He didn't act like someone trying to prove a point. He just looked ready to finish what he had started. The judge sat straight in his chair as the boy entered. He didn't mock him this time. He only watched carefully, wondering how a teenager could know so much about the law. In all his years on the bench, he had seen many lawyers, but none quite like this one. The court session began. The prosecutor, now a little less confident, stood up and tried to recover the upper hand. "Your Honor," he said, "I think it's clear this boy is unqualified. He should not be allowed to continue this defense." The judge leaned back and said, Yesterday, he handled himself better than most licensed attorneys I've seen. Unless you have a legal reason to remove him, the court will allow him to proceed. The prosecutor's face tightened. He wanted to argue more, but the tone in the judge's voice made him stop. He sat down, pretending not to be irritated. The boy stood and thanked the judge. Then he turned to the courtroom and began to speak about what had been revealed the previous day. The contradictions in the witness's story, the missing dates, and the pressure that one accountant admitted he faced. His voice was calm but filled with quiet determination. Each sentence carried weight because he spoke with sincerity, not pride. The audience listened closely. For the first time, they began to feel that the boy was not here for attention or fame. He was here because someone needed justice, and no one else was willing to fight for it. After presenting his review, the boy asked permission to call a new witness, someone who had worked for the same company but had never been called before. The prosecutor frowned. That person was dismissed because their testimony wasn't relevant, he said sharply. Maybe it wasn't relevant before, the boy replied softly, but now it is. The judge nodded. I'll allow it. When the witness entered, she looked nervous. She was a woman in her late 30s holding a small notebook in her hand. The boy greeted her kindly and asked her to relax. I know this must be difficult, he said, but please tell the court everything you remember. At first, she spoke quietly. She said she had worked under the complainant, the man who had accused the business owner of fraud. She explained how things had changed in the company a few months before the accusation. The judge listened with interest, occasionally writing notes. The boy asked, Did you ever see anything unusual about the company's financial records? The woman nodded slowly. Yes. I saw some files were edited late at night. The complainant had access to them, but when I asked about it, he told me not to worry. The prosecutor quickly objected. Hearsay, Your Honor. The judge looked at the boy. Your response? The boy calmly said, This witness worked directly under the person in question. Her observations relate directly to the documents we saw yesterday. They're not hearsay. They're part of the chain of evidence. The judge thought for a moment, then nodded. Objection overruled, the woman continued. She described how certain invoices had been altered just days before they were used to accuse the business owner. The more she spoke, the clearer the picture became. It seemed the accused man had been framed. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent again. The boy thanked her and let her step down. The prosecutor didn't even try to cross-examine her. He just stared at his notes, realizing how much damage had been done to his case. The judge called for a short recess. As people left the courtroom, the reporters rushed to talk to the boy, but he politely declined. I'll speak after the verdict, he said simply. When the judge returned to his chambers, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper behind this. He called his assistant and asked, Find me everything you can about that boy. Where he's from, who his family is, what his background looks like. The assistant nodded and left. While that happened, the boy sat on a bench outside eating a simple sandwich. He looked calm, but inside he was tired. He hadn't slept much. The case meant more to him than anyone knew. Every question, every document, every fact had been carefully studied late at night when others were asleep. A few older lawyers walked by. One of them stopped and looked at him. You're brave, kid, the lawyer said softly. But be careful. This system doesn't like people who make it look foolish. The boy smiled faintly. I'm not trying to make anyone look foolish. I just want the truth to come out. When the court resumed, the atmosphere was even heavier than before. The prosecutor looked uneasy, flipping through his papers, trying to find something that could save his case. The boy, however, seemed steady. Then something unexpected happened. The assistant returned to the judge with a file. The judge opened it and quietly read the papers inside. His expression softened. Now he understood. The file contained the story of a man who had once been one of the brightest lawyers in the city, known for his honesty and compassion. That man had passed away a few years earlier, leaving behind a young son. The boy in the courtroom was that son. The judge closed the file and took a deep breath. He remembered the father well. They had once stood on opposite sides of a case years ago, and though they had disagreed, the judge had always respected the man's intelligence and integrity. Now his son stood before him, continuing what his father had started. The judge looked up from the file, but he didn't say anything. He decided to keep this knowledge to himself, at least for now. He wanted to see how far the boy could go on his own. The boy continued questioning witnesses and presenting new evidence. Each time he spoke, the courtroom fell silent. His words were simple, but the way he built his arguments showed how deeply he understood human nature. He knew when to be gentle and when to press harder. He noticed small details others missed: the twitch of a hand, a change in tone, the quick glance between two people. All these small things told him where the truth was hiding. In one moment, he asked the complainant directly, "If you believe the accused was guilty, why didn't you report it to the authorities right away? Why wait until after he refused to sell you his business?" The man hesitated. I wanted to gather enough proof." The boy smiled slightly. "Or maybe you were waiting for a way to destroy him completely." The courtroom gasped again. The prosecutor shouted, "Objection!" But the judge stayed silent for a moment. He was watching the complainant, who looked uncomfortable and angry. "Objection overruled," the judge finally said. "Answer the question." The complainant's voice cracked. I just wanted justice." The boy leaned forward and said quietly, "Sometimes people use that word when they really mean revenge." The words hung in the air like a knife. The man didn't reply. As the day went on, the judge couldn't help admiring the boy's balance between confidence and humility. He never tried to humiliate anyone, even when he caught them lying. He simply showed the truth and let it speak for itself. That kind of maturity was rare even among older lawyers. By late afternoon, the court was almost done for the day. The judge looked at the clock and said, "We'll continue tomorrow." Everyone started packing up. The boy gathered his papers quietly. As he turned to leave, the judge called him. "Wait a moment, young man." The boy stopped and walked closer. The judge looked at him for a long time, then said softly, "Your father would be proud." The boy froze. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. "You knew my father?" he asked finally. "I did," the judge replied. "He was a fine lawyer, honest, brave, much like you." The boy nodded, his throat tight. "He taught me everything I know." The judge smiled gently. "Then keep using it for good. Don't let the world change you." The boy bowed his head slightly and said, "Thank you, Your Honor." That night, the judge sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. He thought about how he had treated the boy on the first day, mocking him without even knowing who he was. He felt a pang of guilt, but also a strange sense of hope. Maybe this boy was a sign that the next generation would still fight for what was right. Meanwhile, the boy walked through the quiet streets thinking of his father. He remembered sitting beside him as a child, watching him read thick law books late into the night. His father used to say, "The law is not just about rules, it's about people. Never forget the person behind every case." Those words had stayed with him, and now, in this courtroom, they guided everything he did. As he walked, he passed the small office where his father once worked. The lights were off, the sign faded. He stopped for a moment, looking at it. "I hope I'm doing it right, Dad," he whispered. He didn't know that the judge was also thinking of his father that same night, remembering their old cases and long debates. Fate had brought the son into his courtroom years later, not as a child watching from the gallery, but as a defender fighting for truth. The next day promised to be the most important one yet. The case was nearly at its end, and everyone could sense that the verdict would change many lives. But more than that, it would reveal something greater: the power of courage, knowledge, and belief in justice, even when the world mocks you. The boy folded his papers and placed them neatly on his desk at home. Tomorrow, he thought, would be the day the truth finally stood tall. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for whatever was to come. The morning of the final day arrived quietly. A thin layer of mist covered the courthouse steps, and the sky above looked heavy with clouds. The boy stood outside for a moment before entering, holding the same small folder that had now become a symbol of determination. He took a slow breath, looked up at the large building, and whispered to himself, "One last time." Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. People who had never cared about small trials were now sitting in the gallery, waiting to see what would happen next. Some had come because of curiosity, others because they wanted to witness the boy everyone was talking about, the boy who stood up to the system and left seasoned lawyers speechless. The judge arrived quietly. He didn't bang the gavel immediately. Instead, he looked around, his eyes resting for a moment on the boy. He gave a small nod before calling the court to order. "Let's begin," he said, his tone serious but calm. The prosecutor stood up first. He looked tired, frustrated even. He knew the case was slipping away, but he still had to try. "Your Honor," he began, "yesterday's events created confusion. I intend to prove that this boy's arguments, while passionate, do not hold legal weight." The judge nodded for him to continue. The prosecutor brought up new papers, highlighting numbers and details from the company's accounts. He spoke quickly, trying to regain control of the narrative. But his voice lacked the confidence it once had. When he finished, the boy stood up. He didn't rush. He waited until the room was completely silent. Then, in a calm and gentle voice, he said, "Your Honor, what the prosecutor has shown you are numbers. But behind those numbers are people. And people can be tricked, pressured, or even betrayed. That's what happened here." The judge leaned forward slightly. Everyone else sat still. The boy walked to the large board at the front of the room. With the court's permission, he drew a timeline, each event, each transaction laid out in simple order. He explained how the complainant's actions lined up with the moments when the accused refused his offers. He pointed out how every false report appeared exactly after a failed business negotiation. Step by step, he built the story again, but this time it was not just a defense. It was a picture of corruption and revenge. His words were simple but powerful, and the way he explained the flow of events made it impossible to ignore. The judge looked at him differently now. There was no trace of mockery, only respect. He had seen hundreds of lawyers try to confuse the truth with big words. But this boy, he made the truth sound clear. After his explanation, the boy called for one last witness. The courtroom stirred. People hadn't expected this. The door opened and a man entered, his face tense. He was a former employee of the complainant, someone who had been fired months before the case began. The boy greeted him kindly and asked, "Did you ever handle the company's records?" "Yes," the man said. "I worked directly under the complainant for 3 years. Can you tell the court what you saw during that time?" The man hesitated, glancing nervously at the complainant, who avoided his eyes. Then he sighed. "I saw files being changed," he said. Reports were rewritten. Money was moved between accounts to make it look like the accused had taken it. But it wasn't true. The prosecutor stood up quickly. "Objection. This witness has a personal grudge. He was fired." The judge looked at the boy. "Do you wish to respond?" The boy nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. He may have been fired, but if what he says can be proven with documents, his grudge doesn't matter." The judge nodded. "Continue." The man pulled a small folder from his bag. "These are copies of the emails I saved before I left the company. They show the complainant instructing us to modify files." Gasps filled the room. The boy took the folder and handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge opened it and read quietly. His eyebrows rose slightly. The boy said softly, "These are dated weeks before the case was filed. That means the complainant was preparing this accusation in advance." The judge's voice was low but firm. "This is serious evidence." The prosecutor tried to object again, but even he knew the weight of what had just been presented. His tone grew weaker. "We can't be sure those are real?" The judge cut him off gently. "They will be verified." The boy sat down. His job for now was done. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Everyone knew what this meant. As the day went on, the judge reviewed the documents while the court paused for lunch. During that break, the prosecutor approached the boy outside the courtroom. His voice was quieter than before. "You're good," he said. "Too good. But this world isn't kind to people like you." The boy looked up, meeting his eyes. "I'm not here to be liked," he said softly. "I'm here because someone's truth matters." The prosecutor sighed, then walked away without another word. When the session resumed, the judge asked both sides to make their closing statements. The prosecutor went first. He spoke of procedure and the importance of facts. He tried to remind the court that law should not bend to emotion. But even as he spoke, it was clear his confidence had faded. Then it was the boy's turn. He stood up, walked slowly to the center of the room, and looked around. His eyes weren't defiant. They were calm, almost humble. "Your Honor," he began, "I'm not a lawyer. Not by license, not by title. But I understand something that maybe we all forget sometimes. Justice isn't just about who has the biggest office or the most experience. It's about what's right. It's about truth." He paused. The silence in the courtroom was so deep that even the sound of papers shifting echoed faintly. "My father taught me that the law is like a light. It shows the path when everything feels dark. It doesn't belong to judges or attorneys. It belongs to everyone who believes in fairness. The man I'm defending today isn't rich. He can't afford powerful lawyers. But he deserves the same justice as anyone else. And if we forget that, then we lose what makes this place special. His words struck the judge deeply. They reminded him of the father, the man who had once stood in this very courtroom and said something similar years ago. The boy continued, "This case isn't just about documents or money. It's about what happens when someone uses power to destroy another person's life out of greed. That's not justice. That's cruelty. And the law should never protect cruelty." He walked back to his table and sat down. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds before the judge finally spoke. "The court will take a short recess before delivering its decision." The sound of the gavel echoed, but it felt softer this time, almost thoughtful. When the judge went to his chambers, he didn't speak to anyone. He sat alone, reading the papers again, remembering the father and looking at the son's clear, careful words. He felt something shift inside him, a reminder of why he had become a judge in the first place. After nearly an hour, the judge returned. The courtroom stood as he entered. He looked at the boy, then at the accused man, and finally at the complainant, who sat pale and silent. In reviewing the evidence and testimonies, the judge said, "This court finds that the accusation against the defendant lacks credibility. The documents presented by the defense clearly show manipulation and falsification of records by the complainant." A murmur spread through the room. The judge raised his hand for silence. "The defendant is acquitted of all charges," he said firmly. "Furthermore, an investigation will be opened against the complainant for fraud and perjury." The courtroom erupted. Some people clapped softly before stopping when the judge glared at them. The boy didn't move. He simply closed his folder and took a deep breath. The judge looked at him and said quietly, "Young man, before you leave, I have something to say." The boy stood, waiting. "When you first came into this courtroom, I saw only a child. I laughed and I judged you without knowing who you were. Today I realize that wisdom doesn't always come with age, and courage doesn't need permission. You reminded me what justice truly means." The boy's eyes glistened slightly, but he held his composure. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge smiled faintly. "I should be thanking you." The accused man, free at last, turned and shook the boy's hand with tears in his eyes. "I owe you everything," he said. The boy smiled and replied, "You owe me nothing. Just live honestly, that's all." Outside, the crowd waited. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but the boy didn't stop. He walked past them quietly down the steps into the cool afternoon air. The judge watched him from the window above. He saw how the boy's shoulders were straight, but there was a softness in his walk, a kind of peace. For the first time in years, the judge smiled not out of pride but out of hope. Later that evening, as the courthouse lights dimmed, the judge sat in his office writing a letter. It was addressed to a law foundation that supported young talents. He wrote about the boy, not his name, not his fame, but his heart. "This young man reminded me that justice still has a soul," he wrote. Meanwhile, the boy returned to his small home. He placed the folder on the table and sat quietly for a while. Then he took out an old photo of his father, a man in a suit, smiling kindly. The boy looked at it and whispered, "I did it, Dad, just like you taught me." He sat back, exhausted but at peace. The world outside was noisy, full of chaos, but inside that small room everything was calm. The story of the boy spread in the days that followed. Newspapers called him a prodigy, a genius, a hero, but he never accepted any of those titles. He avoided interviews, ignored invitations. He said only one thing when asked about his success: "It wasn't me. It was the truth." And though the judge never saw him again, he kept that letter as a reminder that once, in his courtroom, a boy had walked in, faced ridicule, and showed everyone what real justice looked like. The sun had barely risen the next day when the boy opened his eyes. The world outside was calm, yet his mind was full of noise. The case was over. The man he defended was free, and the courtroom had turned into a place of respect instead of mockery. But despite everything, he didn't feel like celebrating. He simply sat at the small table by his window looking at the quiet street below, thinking about what would come next. A soft knock came at his door. When he opened it, he found the man he had defended standing there. His eyes were tired, but there was peace in them now. "I wanted to see you," the man said, holding a small brown envelope. "You didn't have to. the boy replied gently. I did, the man said, stepping inside. You saved my life. My business, my name, everything. I'll never forget it. The boy shook his head. I only showed the truth. You were already innocent, the man smiled sadly. Still, most people wouldn't have tried. Not a single lawyer believed me. But you did. He placed the envelope on the table. This is for you. I don't have much, but it's something. The boy looked at the envelope, then pushed it back. Keep it, use it to start again. I don't do this for money. The man hesitated, then nodded slowly. Your father raised you well, he said quietly before leaving. When the door closed, the boy looked out the window again. A part of him missed his father more than ever. The victory had brought him no joy, only the reminder of who wasn't there to see it. Later that day, newspapers carried the headline about the case. Young genius outsmarts entire court, one read. Another said, Judge humbled by teen defender. Everywhere he went, people stared. Some whispered in admiration. Others doubted the truth of the story. Reporters waited outside his small home, shouting questions whenever he appeared. He avoided them all. Fame wasn't what he wanted. His father had once told him, when you start working for attention instead of justice, you stop being a lawyer. He carried those words in his heart. At the courthouse, the judge sat in his office reading the same newspapers. Every article mentioned the boy, but none captured what the judge had truly witnessed. The calm strength, the quiet intelligence, the pure honesty. He sighed softly and set the papers aside. A knock on his door broke the silence. His assistant entered with a hesitant smile. Sir, you've been invited to a public forum next week. They want you to speak about the case. The judge looked up. They don't want me, he said. They want to hear about him. Yes, the assistant admitted, but they believe you can explain who he really is. The judge thought for a long moment, then nodded. Maybe it's time people knew what justice looks like when it's pure. That evening, the boy walked through the park near the courthouse. The trees rustled gently, and he could hear the laughter of children playing nearby. For the first time in many months, he allowed himself to smile. As he sat on a bench, an old man approached and sat beside him. You're the boy from the newspaper, aren't you? The man asked. I suppose, the boy said softly. The man chuckled. You reminded me of someone I knew long ago. A lawyer who fought cases with heart, not money. The boy turned to him, curious. What was his name? The old man smiled faintly. I don't remember his name, but I remember his words. He said, even if the world forgets the truth, keep fighting for it. The boy's chest tightened. Those were his father's words. He looked at the man, wondering if fate had sent him a message. That night, the boy returned home and opened his father's old case file, one he had kept since he was a child. Inside were handwritten notes and letters from clients who had once thanked his father for helping them. Reading those words reminded him that kindness had power, even in a world that often rewarded arrogance. Meanwhile, the judge spent the next few days thinking about his own life. For years, he had ruled the courtroom with authority, believing that experience made him wiser. But watching the boy had changed something inside him. He began treating every case differently, listening more carefully, questioning with empathy, and respecting even the smallest voice that spoke truth. At the public forum, when he finally stood before the crowd, the cameras flashed, and people waited for his words. The world saw a boy defend a man, he began slowly, but I saw something greater. I saw courage in its purest form. I mocked him because of his age, and he answered not with anger but with knowledge and grace. That's the kind of spirit we need in this world. The audience listened silently. He reminded me, the judge continued, that justice is not about pride or power. It's about fairness, and it belongs to anyone brave enough to fight for it. After the speech, people applauded, but the judge didn't smile. He simply looked thoughtful. He knew the boy had done more than win a case. He had reminded everyone what justice truly meant. The boy, meanwhile, lived quietly. He didn't attend interviews or public events. He helped people quietly. Neighbors who needed advice, small shopkeepers accused of petty crimes, anyone who couldn't afford a lawyer. Word spread again, but this time it wasn't about fame. It was about hope. One afternoon, as he helped an old woman fill out legal papers for her house, a young student approached him. Are you the one who defended that big case? She asked shyly. He smiled. That was just one case. She looked at him with admiration. I want to learn from you. The boy looked thoughtful. Learn from justice, not from me, he said. It will teach you more than I ever can. The days passed quietly, but the judge couldn't stop thinking about him. He decided to visit the boy's home one evening. When the boy opened the door, he was surprised to see the judge standing there, holding a small book wrapped in brown paper. Your Honor, the boy said, unsure how to react. The judge smiled softly. Not in court now. You can just call me an old man who wants to return something. He handed the book to the boy. The boy opened it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. His father's handwriting covered the pages. The judge explained, Your father gave this to me years ago after we worked on a case together. He said I should keep it until I meet someone who understands justice better than I do. I think that person is you. The boy's eyes filled with tears. He held the book gently as though afraid it might vanish. Thank you, he whispered. The judge nodded. No, thank you for reminding me why I became a judge in the first place. They sat together for a long time, talking about the boy's father, about the cases he fought, the people he helped, and the dreams he had for the future. The judge shared stories the boy had never heard, and for the first time in years the boy laughed freely. When the judge left, the boy stood at the door, watching him walk away into the quiet street. He realized that sometimes change didn't come through grand speeches or fame. It came through moments of honesty between two people who cared about the truth. Days turned into weeks. The judge continued his work carrying a lighter heart, and the boy, with his father's notebook always near him, began taking on more small cases. He spent his evenings teaching children in his neighborhood how the law worked, how to read documents, understand their rights, and stand up for themselves. He didn't charge them. He said, If you understand your rights, you can protect your life. The children adored him. To them, he wasn't just a hero from the newspapers. He was their friend, their teacher, their protector. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings, the boy sat with them under a tree, explaining how even a simple rule could make a big difference. One little girl asked, Will you ever become a real lawyer? He smiled. Maybe one day. But even if I don't, I'll always fight for what's right. That night, as he walked home, he passed the courthouse again. The lights were on, and for a moment he stopped and looked at the building that had changed his life. He remembered the laughter, the doubt, the struggle, and the final victory. He realized that every moment, even the pain, had shaped him into who he was. Inside the courthouse, the judge was finishing his day. He looked out the window and saw the boy standing outside, gazing up at the steps. The judge smiled faintly and whispered to himself, The world is in good hands. Months later, a letter arrived for the boy. It was from a National Law Institute offering him a scholarship. Someone had recommended him quietly. He didn't need to guess who, it could only be the judge. He folded the letter and looked at his father's picture again. I'll keep learning, he said softly. I'll keep fighting for the truth. He packed his small bag, placed the notebook inside, and prepared to leave for the city. Before walking away, he turned to the street where he had grown up and smiled. Somewhere across town, the judge received a short note that simply said, Thank you for believing in me. He read it slowly, then placed it in his drawer next to his old gavel. He knew he would never forget the boy or the lesson he had taught him, that justice still had a heart, and sometimes it beat inside the smallest, most unexpected person. As the boy's train pulled away that evening, he looked out the window, watching the fading city lights. The world was wide, uncertain, and full of challenges, but he wasn't afraid. He had learned from his father, from the case, and from every person who doubted him that truth was stronger than power. The train moved forward, carrying him toward new stories, new struggles, and perhaps new people who would one day see in him what the judge had seen, the quiet courage to stand alone and speak for what was right.